called The Art of Choosing, and I've essentially spent about 3 decades now looking at why do we want choice, and what are the things that affect how and what we choose, and what are some things we can do to choose better. Now, today I'm going to talk about a very particular phenomenon that is relevant to the dating market. We live in a world where there is an explosion of choice happening. And that really it started to happen in the 70s, but in the last 50 years, that explosion has skyrocketed. So just to give you a sense of the scale, in the 1970s, the average grocery store in the United States had about 9,000 products in it. Today, the average grocery store has over 40,000 products. Today, the average Walmart has about 4 million products and growing with their recent expansion to more and more e-commerce. Amazon has upwards of 300 million products in it. And if you're worried that COVID has been destroying the number of choices you have, you are absolutely wrong. There are 200 different streaming sites now available to you, and if you go on Apple, just look at their podcasts and apps, etc., you have 2.2 million and counting. It is not just that we live in a world where we have a lot of choice, we live in a world where we have a lot of information. So on average, we check our phones now every day about 150 times. We generate, in terms of the globe, about 2.5 quintillion bits of information per day. And if you look at the amount of information coming at us subconsciously, consciously, it is estimated that it's about the equivalent of reading about 174 newspapers. So back in the 1990s, long before this explosion had really gone beyond the tipping point, I started to wonder about what are the consequences of offering people more and more choice. And I didn't know that I was at the tipping point at the time. And so I ran a study at that time that first looked at this question of how do people respond as the number of choices proliferate. I was a PhD student at Stanford University at the time, and I used to frequent this upscale grocery store called Dregers. Now, at that time, that store was really unique. Today, it's almost passé. This store offered people lots and lots of variety. It was almost like going to an amusement park. They had over 250 types of mustards, vinegars, mayonnaises, over 500 different types of fruits and vegetables, over 75 different types of extra virgin olive oil. And so I used to like going to this store. It was fun. But I never bought anything. I would go over to the local Safeway. Now, admittedly, I was a poor PhD student, but still. And so what happened was, after much discussion with the store manager, we decided to do what is today been dubbed as the famous JAM study. And some of you might have heard about it. And although it doesn't have to do with dating, I want to describe this study and one other study to give you a sense of some of the underlying phenomenon that happen when people are confronted by a lot of choice. So at that time, Dregers had about 348 different types of jam in their aisle. And what we did was we picked one brand of jam called Wilkin & Sons, the Queen of England's jam, and we set up a little tasting booth right near the entrance of this store. And we put out either 6 different flavors of jam or 24 different flavors of jam. And we looked at 2 things. First, in which case were people more likely to stop and sample some jam? Second, in which case were people more likely to buy a jar of jam? And here's what we found. People were more likely to stop when there were 24 on display, about 60%, than when there were 6 on display, about 40%. And even though those numbers seemingly equal 100%, they're actually 2 entirely different populations. Then we looked at buying behavior. So everybody who stopped at the tasting booth was given a coupon, giving them $1 off if they bought a jar of jam. And what we found was that we saw the opposite effect when it came down to buying behavior. Of the people who stopped when there were 24 on display, only 3% of them bought a jar of jam. Whereas of the people who stopped when there were 6 on display, 30% of them bought a jar of jam. Now, if you do the math, people were actually at least 6 times more likely to buy a jar of jam when they saw less than when they saw more. That was the first documentation that although people are initially more attracted to having a larger display of option when it comes down to making a choice, they're more likely to make a choice when they see less than when they see more. Now I'm going to show you one other study that doesn't have to do with dating that I think also further explicates the phenomenon that goes on, particularly when you're talking about more subjective choice-making experiences. So now let's take the case of choosing chocolate, right? We all love chocolate. It's really delicious. And it's one of the few things I can serve to undergraduate students who are not of age, which is still a nice sensual experience. So can't get away with serving them beer. So we brought students into the laboratory where they either encountered 6 different delicious flavors of Godiva chocolate or 30 different flavors of Godiva chocolate. And they have a really simple task. Just choose one and eat it. No questions asked, just choose one and you can eat it. And then when you're done, just tell me how you liked it. And as you're walking out the door, I'll either pay you for what you just did for me, or I'll give you a box of free chocolate. And so what happens? It turns out, so because we were able to do 6 versus 30, we kept rotating which 6 out of those 30. And what we observed was that literally the same chocolate, if selected from 6, was perceived as more delicious than if it was selected from 30. Not only that, if they perceived it as more delicious, they were more likely to pick a box of chocolate as their final compensation than money. Now, in later studies, what we also found was that if you're shown 6 and you know that that 6 came out of a selection of 30, so you know that I constrained your choice set for you, well, then the positive effects of giving you 6 gets a bit more moderated. It's more muted. I'm less satisfied with the one I've chosen because I keep wondering, well, what if I'd seen the whole selection? If I ask you to tell me how many of the 30 you want to see, most people do not say they want to see 30. They know they can't handle 30. And on average, they will pick somewhere between about 15 and 18 out of those 30. But they're still less satisfied than if they're just choosing from a set of 6 when they know that that set of 6 is the complete set. Now, these studies I'm describing to you were done almost 20 years ago. And since then, there has been thousands of studies done, not just by me, but by many other people that have gone on to look at the effects of offering people more and more choice. And in fact, many industry practices have been changed as a function of these findings. Whether you're looking at consumer choices, investment choices, your market has definitely been affected, and I'll tell you later about the dating studies. And even more recent, very serious, substantial choices like life and death. There are essentially 4 consequences to offering people more and more choice. First, the more choices people have, the less likely they are to make a choice. They choose not to choose, they procrastinate, they go for the default. Second, the more choices they have, the more likely they are to choose suboptimally. They make errors. You see a lot of performance decrements happen as people get flustered and experience cognitive overload. Third, the more choices they have, the more likely they are to exhibit inconsistent preferences, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. Fourth, the more choices they have, the more likely they are to be less satisfied with whatever they've chosen. And it turns out that even when you know that you've objectively chosen better or the best in that choice set, just the idea that there might be something else that you didn't come across that's better. People start to fixate on that, and that increases regret. So those are the 4 consequences. Now I want to take a close look at what has been the evolution of choice when you think about the dating market. Now in 1932, there was actually a very famous study done looking at dating and love. And what they observed was that if you took a sample of over 5,000 people living in the city of Philadelphia, what you observe is over 40% of the marriages took place amongst people that lived within basically a 20-block radius of one another. Now think about that. Because it's kind of like being able to choose from a chocolate set of 6. Sure, they know their choice set is constrained, but they also know how well they did on that choosing exercise because they know approximately what the market sort of feels like for them and how well they did. Did I get the best in my general geographic area? And there's obviously, as a function of them living nearby, there's probably shared interests, shared values that they're naturally matching on. So obviously, our geographic ability to navigate has grown exponentially. Now let's look at marriage. 1950s, people were getting married pretty young, 20s. By 2014, most recent numbers, we're now up to maybe an average of 27 years old. In urban environments, that goes up even higher. Say New York City, you're in your 30s. Now, Match.com started back in 1995. That was the first time you had an online dating site. And in fact, I was at Stanford when it launched in Silicon Valley, and knew quite a few people that actually were amongst the first users. Today, of course, the industry equals at least around $3 billion, if not more. And in the United States, when you look at the proliferation of the kinds of dating apps that exist today, it is incredible. We are way past Match.com, eHarmony, OkCupid, Tinder. I mean, there are so many different niche dating apps. So much so that it is a real proliferation of choice. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the kind of proliferation that we're seeing. So we're seeing 2 types of proliferation happening in the dating market. And forgive me if I don't cover every single one of the different dating apps, because you know that in the United States, we have about 2,500, and estimated at least 2,500 in the rest of the globe. So there's no way I can capture all that. But essentially, you have 2 types of variations that are happening in the dating market. And I would put them into 2 buckets. So first, you have a lot of variation happening in choice menus. So on the one hand, you have things like Match.com, eHarmony, etc., League, Coffee Meets Bagel, where you're giving people a small choice set, a lot of information per choice, more information per profile. Then on the other hand, you have Tinder, lots of choice, 1 information bit, 1 or 2 information bits per choice, right? So remember how I said there was a proliferation happening, choice and information, and those are obviously coupled. What else are we seeing? Well, we're seeing the advent of niche. And you have a lot of different niches. I mean, it's incredible to consider all the different niches, whether it's women trying to find men with beards, farmers only, cat lovers, gluten-free, different sorts of passions. I mean, I don't even think I could possibly cover all the different niches. And so what are we actually seeing? What you're seeing is a recognition in the dating marketplace that we should try to curate choice. that perhaps less is more. So let's try to make the choosing environment for people a bit easier. And how we're going to do that? We're going to go for some form of less is more and make it fun. And I would bucket it into two kinds of choosing experiences, which is one that goes for quantity, right? Quantity of choice, less information bit per choice, versus quality. I'm going to give you less choice, more information per option. So that gives us a sense of what the marketplace looks like right now. And what are the consequences of this marketplace? Well, you have two kinds of consequences happening. On the one hand, you are seeing far more users than you used to have. So amongst the homosexuals, you're seeing about 70% engagement with online dating. When you come to heterosexuals, though, it's climbing upward for sure. It's somewhere in the 30s now, and like maybe 35% of heterosexuals are using online dating. So there's obviously more potential there for market. And I'm going to get to it a little bit as to what are some of the concerns that customers have when they're dealing with dating choosing today. So that's a quick snapshot of where we've come in the dating arena. Now I'm going to show you what some of the science has to say about how people are making choices in this world of a lot of choice. So following the studies that I did on jam and chocolate, one of the early studies that I did on choice actually was in dating. Now, this is before dating became a real thing. I was one of the scientists that created the speed dating events. I didn't know it was going to become a thing, a product. And so any of you who've read the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, there is a chapter dedicated to the study I'm about to describe to you. And this study ultimately led to about 3 different academic papers at that time. And I'm going to show you the study and the findings. And I think you'll find them interesting because this happened before the real explosion in dating apps. And so we set up a speed dating event in Upper West Side, here right by Columbia campus. And this was part of a study. And what happened was beforehand, people were asked, what are you looking for in a mate? And they had to answer lots of different questions like, I'm looking for somebody who's funny, who's ambitious, who's intelligent. They had to indicate on each of these how important was these things to them. And they arrive at the event, right? And because I'm a scientist, I can sort of play with them. And so I invited either 10 men, 10 women, or 20 men, 20 women. I apologize. This is before we got sophisticated, so this was purely heterosexual dating. And so we had 10 and 10, or 20 and 20. And then during the event itself, they had a 4-minute date. So you met, you had a 4-minute date, then you filled out a survey and you rated this person on those very same attributes. How funny, how attractive, how ambitious, how intelligent, how sincere, how much do I like this person overall? Do I feel like I have shared interests with this person? How likely is this person to say yes to me? Yes or no? Do I ever want to see this person again? In the event that 2 people said yes, they were given each other's email address, and you have a match. Okay? And so like speed dating is done today, males switch chairs, so by the end, you get to see 10 dates or 20 dates. So here's what we learned back then. And I'm going to share with you these results because as you'll see, what we observed back then turned out to be very true today. If anything, what you see today is even more intensified than what I'm going to describe to you is what we saw about 15 years ago. And so here's what you see happen in this speed dating climate. Men and women play different games. They play a different dating game. So women play a fixed number game, whereas men play the ratio game. What do I mean by that? Women decide, okay, I want about 5 or 6 different possibilities. It doesn't matter to me if I see 10 or if I see 20. I'm going to pick 5 or 6. And remember, these women didn't know that there were other women who were picking from 20. So no matter what condition they were in, they picked around 5 or 6. It's like they had a fixed number in their head. Now, what about the men? Well, they play a ratio game. Hey, I got 10 women to choose from. I want to pick 50%. So I pick 5 out of 10 and 10 out of 10. Now, it gets a little more nuanced and more sophisticated than that, in that men, if you look at their perceptions of how likely is she to say yes to me, if they start to feel that most of these women are going to say no to them, by the time they get towards the last 5 dates, they just start hitting that yes button over and over and over again, because they got a ratio in their head that they got to meet, right? You certainly see that when you look at people's swiping, there's swiping rates today, right? So males, they want to hit that ratio. Now, what are they looking for? What do they claim they're looking for anyway? Turns out men say they're about 18% higher in terms of that they're looking for looks. And in fact, that pans out when you look at which women they're more likely to say yes to in terms of their perceptions of her looks. That, of course, goes out the window towards the later part of the dating cycle, because if they think they're not scoring, they're going to say yes, independent of whether they thought she was attractive or not, because obviously girls get prettier at closing time. Women, on the other hand, will say they want men who are more ambitious, more intelligent. What's interesting about that is that women are better than men, at least in a 4-minute period, at judging a man's intelligence. It turned out women's ratings of the male's intelligence in that 4-minute period was highly correlated with the men's GRE scores. So these were mainly all Columbia graduate students that participated, so we actually knew their GRE scores. Men rate lower females' ambition and intelligence. They don't want somebody who's more ambitious or intelligent than them. They want somebody equal or below, but they're not as accurate at judging it as are women. What about racial preferences? So it turns out women are the gatekeepers on racial, on the sort of interracial dating. So it turns out that men will say yes to women of a lot more varieties than will women. So women serve as those gatekeepers. And there are certain races that tend to be less preferred, like Asian males or Black African American females. I want you to look at these 2 nail polish colors. Okay? So one of these is Adorable, and one of these is ballet slippers. And when I show you the 2 names, it all makes sense. Sure, Adorable and ballet slippers are 2 different colors. And yet, most of us would say, yeah, they're different, but does it really matter? Now, if you're a real nail polish connoisseur, I'm sure it matters to you. But let's just say, unless you are a real connoisseur, it's confusing. And here's what I want to argue to you. I want to argue to you that when you look at that proliferation of dating apps that we have created right now in the marketplace, it's like having a dizzying array of pink nail polishes. And I say that, and I understand some of you might be offended by me describing it that way. I say that because there's a lot of tweaking going on. And, should I give them 3 at happy hour, or should I give them, 100 people that they could swipe on? You're manipulating choice, you're manipulating niche, but you're not actually understanding that your customers are beyond that phase of simply appreciating having more choice. They're more sophisticated than that. That's done. We are in a marketplace of a lot of choice. They want something more than mere superficial curation of choice. What they want is for you to understand the kind of choosing experience that they want, but they don't know how to articulate it. So what do they articulate to you? They articulate to you, hey, I'm experiencing fatigue. I'm tired of swiping. Or, hey, this is the commoditization of humans. I don't like that. Really, what they're saying is, I don't like it when I'm judged unfairly. And I'm getting tired of judging other people. Or they're saying, hey, I want a meaningful relationship, damn it. You're not giving me that. What are you giving me? You're giving me a bunch of noise, a bunch of trash. And yet you will argue back to me, yeah, but you know what? Every customer now has 4 or 5 different apps and they're still playing. And I'm going to say to you, yes, but you're not giving them what you want. If you look at what the marketplace is in dating today, my argument to you is it's like any nascent market. We've gone through that period where we throw darts and we experiment with lots of little variations, just like we did when we were going through the revolution and the evolution of the car industry, just like we did with the phone industry. It is now time to consolidate because your customers are more sophisticated. And I'm going to argue to you that there are 2 kinds of customers today, and it's up to you as to the extent to which you want to deliver to those customers what they're looking for. And I'm going to describe these 2 types to you using the language of choice, since that's the only thing I really know anything about. And those 2 customers are, first, the explorers. These are the people, hey, I don't know what I want. Stop trying to give me things and think I know what I want. I want you to show me and teach me what I want. And so that's the experience I'm looking for. I'm not looking to get what I want. I'm looking to pay you to give me an experience, a choosing process. Now, Tinder was a leader in that, right? They gave me a process. It's not about finding the one. It's about giving me an experience. I can swipe. It's like a game. It's kind of fun. And I'm going to argue to you that those choosers are growing in number. They're looking for a process. They're looking for an experience of self-learning, self-discovery. And that self-learning, self-discovery is, Tinder is not competing with Match.com or OkCupid. It's competing with video games like Candy Crush or Angry Birds on the one side, and they're competing with porn, like Pornhub. Or I think there's even one that's called Tinder Fuck or something. So what are they actually providing people? Experiences for self-learning. And that experiences for self-learning goes beyond just seeing a photo. It's not about relationships. It's about having that cool experience where I'm feeling like, hey, I learned something about what I like and what I don't like. The other type is the preference matcher. The preference matcher says, I know what I want. It's like that person who knows exactly what kind of dish they want in the Chinese restaurant. They know exactly what they want. And they want your help to help find it, to search it for them, to make their choosing experience much, much, much easier and more enjoyable. They don't want to have to do all the weeding out. Now, until now, we did these simple, easy to do algorithms based on using AI, etc. Like, okay, let's just have them do personality tests, and then you can match 2 people on their personality types or match people on their shared interests. And that helps once they're actually in a relationship. Might actually reduce some conflict, but that's not what creates connection. That's not what actually gets them interested in each other to begin with. What gets them interested in each other to begin with is having an experience that makes them feel that we just formed a meaningful connection. And how do we construct that meaningful connection? That means that we, as the dating providers, have to create those meaningful experiences and opportunities for the individuals. How do you create an authentic connection? And I'll leave you with one little tidbit here. Let's imagine I bring male, female, not even into a room. This is actually done during COVID, online, right? And they see different objects, They experience different objects. So they're given a bunch of objects. So they're going to see color. They're going to touch some fabric. They're going to eat something. So we had different sensory experiences. The two parties are asked to describe what they're experiencing. In some cases, they're told, hey, just share your experiences. In other cases, they're told, you know what, you'll share and then you'll get to see whether you are seeing the same thing. Turns out if I put that pressure on, you're not going to create a connection. But if I take away that pressure and I just tell you to share your experiences, regardless of whether you agree or not, those are individuals that subsequently feel that they had a connection with each other. They also feel that what they both experienced was more real, and the effects of that actually last at least a month later. So to conclude, what I'm suggesting here is that I think there's a real opportunity in the dating world, where I think the opportunity here is to actually go to the next level of giving people a more sophisticated choosing experience, where you're either giving them that real opportunity to explore or that real opportunity to engage in significant preference matching. Thank you very much.